Welcome to the Married People Podcast, where we help you make marriage real, fun, and simple. Each week, we have honest conversations about one simple thing that can make your marriage better. Because when your marriage is better, everything's better. I'm CJ, and today I'm joined by our resident newlywed, Afton.
Hi.
And our 22-year marriage veteran. He's an author, speaker, and the director of marriedpeople.org, Ted Lowe.
Hey, everybody.
And I'm joined once again by our very special guest, Sandy Wise.
Good morning.
So if you missed last week's episode, you really need to pause this one and go back and check out part one, because this is a two-part podcast episode series, if you will, with Sandy, where Sandy is just telling her story, and it's amazing. So, but this is a part two. So if you missed part one, you need to check that one out first. But today on the Married People Podcast, we're going to talk about what it means to live out till death do us part. Now that's a part of the marriage vows that all of us make to our spouse. But Ted, if I'm being honest, death isn't something any of us want to think about. So why is it important, though, and relevant for us to talk about and discuss here today?
Well, we talk about on this podcast, we want it to be real, fun, and simple.
Right.
So, only because of our special guests that I feel like it would make sense for this podcast for us to talk about Till Death Do Us Part is our special guest with Sandy, because the way that she and Donald did marriage when Donald was here on earth, and even how she's still a great model of marriage now that he has gone to be to heaven. It's been so positive, yet so completely transparent. I have so loved it. And I thought, again, when we started this podcast, we've got to have Sandy on this podcast soon. And oddly enough, I just want to dive in, to Sandy's story. And, I'm going to go ahead and forewarn you, if you're listening, this is going to sound like a really heavy question, but the literal, not light, like not heavy, but the light that Sandy brings to it is just amazing.
Now, Ted, before you jump in, if somebody doesn't remember from part one, I just want to remind people who Sandy is here sitting at our table. So before, with bated breath, hold your question, and I'll remind people that Sandy and her husband Donald met in 1974, and they married in 77. And Sandy has been a music and theater teacher here in the Atlanta area for 25 or 30 years or so. She actually taught me piano lessons 20 years ago, which is amazing.
I'm still waiting for the pictures that we can put in the show notes of baby CJ.
And together, Sandy and Donald served extensively here in the Atlanta area, specifically at North Point Community Church. And now Donald went to heaven about 23 months ago, but their marriage is still telling a great story. And that's kind of where we pick up today, isn't it, Ted?
It is still telling a great story about marriage. That's why I thought this episode actually was going to be a very positive one, a very relevant one to all of us. I know it's been an inspiring one to me. Sandy, tell us a little bit about Donald's final week here on earth and what that was like for you guys.
Ted, you knew Donald well, so you knew that every other word of his mouth was something about Jesus. So even his last week, those last few days before he actually went to sleep, he just wanted to make sure that our technician knew about Jesus. And he had shared with her, and she came in the room, and he would look at me and look at her. And I said, Donald just wants to make sure you know. We had actually had one of our nurses was Jewish, and she came to know Jesus on Christmas before Donald went to heaven.
Wow.
So he just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that same Jesus that he had served all of his life. So the last week, I remember the doctor walking in a few days before Donald went to heaven. And if you'll notice that I have always said before Donald went to heaven, because for me, Donald said a few months before he went to heaven, he said, that cancer is probably going to get me. And I said, I know. He said, well, let's just realize I'm going to be just at a different address for a while. I'm going to be in heaven and you're going to be here. So just a different address. So, and also when you have grandchildren, it's such a great way to let them know exactly where Pawpaw is.
Wow.
So that last week, I remember the doctor coming in on Friday, and I was by myself. It was early in the morning, and Donald had not been awake since Wednesday night. And the doctor looked at me, and I remember his words very well, like it was yesterday. Are you ready for this? And I said, I'm not ready, but I'm prepared.
Wow.
And I knew then those were not my words. The morning that Donald went to heaven, how appropriate. It was a Sunday morning, of course, because Donald's in the ministry, and it was at 11:20 on Sunday morning. And, of course, all of our children were out serving at their churches, except my one daughter said, no, Mom, I got to be there with you. We had watched service, just, he had not been awake, but we had watched the service and listened to worship music, which we had going all the time. It was amazing because the nurses would walk in and they'd say, there's such a peace in this room. And you and I both know it's that peace that passes all understanding. And so at 11:20, I had gone to the foot of Donald's bed, and I can remember looking at it, and I said it kind of loud. I said, wow, Donald, God is saying, well done. Well done, Donald Wise. And I went over and sat down, and Rachel turned and looked, and she said, Mom, Dad's not breathing. And we went over there, and at that moment, 40 years went by so fast. But she said, Mom, do you remember the first words out of your mouth? And I didn't. She said, you said, oh, man, I wish I could see what you're seeing right now. I wish I could see what you're seeing right now. Because he was in the presence of Almighty God. Someone he had served so well all of his life, and he was able to see what it was all about. The crazy thing about it is that Donald always would come back from these conferences. Of course, you were at the same conference, didn't matter what it was. He'd come back, he'd go, oh, man, you need to go next time. You need to go next time. And I thought he always beat me going to all these conferences and hearing all this great, rich stuff. And there he was one more time up there going, man, you need to come back.
You need to see this stuff.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Sandy, the way you've lived out in sickness and health, and you and Donald both was so beautiful. But the way you've lived out till death do part has been nothing short of inspiring. You've been so vulnerable and so real. You talk about the tough parts, but you have this absolute trust in God. You actually remind me a lot of David in Psalms. He was so transparent. It would be things like, God, where are you? Why have you abandoned me? Not that you said those things, but you've been real about the pain. And then he would come back around, but I trust you. And so that's what I've really appreciated. It's such a balanced thing, and what you've modeled, not only personally, but even publicly through Facebook, and just about the days you have. There was a recent post that I think is a perfect illustration of that. And if you don't mind, I'd love for you to read that for our listeners.
2 years ago, notice the Georgia blanket, and the picture is actually our hands. We're holding hands. Mm-hmm. Here it is, Sunday morning again. They come really fast these days. 99 weeks, 23 months. Talking to another widow last night about when do you move on? Well, you don't. The loss is more than you can fathom. The void is not fillable, and the loneliness is unexplainable. But what do I do with all of this is a choice. I choose to lean into my Heavenly Father in the loss, the void, and the loneliness. And I choose to have His joy in His peace. I choose to walk in victory and not defeat, because my God has promised He will never leave me nor forsake me. And my friend, He has proven that. 99 weeks, 23 months later on this Sunday morning in January 2018. Choose you this day who you'll serve, but for me, Sandy Wise, I choose to serve the Lord.
And that, as we've seen you walk through this, that seems that is your daily choice. We're going to talk a little bit about that today.
Yeah, Sandy, like Ted said, you model that till death do us part, that phrase, this, what we're talking about today, you model this so well. And I think one of the best examples of that was Donald's memorial service as well. And I was part of that service. There were, how many people?
I don't know. They told me that there were probably over 1,100 people at his service. It was one of the, still to this day, was one of the most powerful services I'd ever been to. And I remember the emotions of it, the celebration of it. But just from your perspective, tell us about that day. It's crazy. All of my kids are at my house, and there's always tons of people at my house. It's just always been that way. And, all the girls in there getting ready together, almost like, something crazy, somebody's wedding or a prom or whatever. And we were all in there getting ready. And I can remember one of my girls looking at me and saying, "Mom, this is weird, isn't it? We're going to Dad's celebration. This is weird that we're," and I said, "Yeah." I said, "But wouldn't he be pleased that we were all in here doing this?" He'd be saying, "Oh yeah, you girls, y'all go have a good time." That was just stunning. I can remember us walking in to the auditorium, and the song playing was one of Donald's very, very favorite. It was Stephen Curtis Chapman, "No Better Place on Earth Than the Road That Leads to Heaven." And I could see him up there going, "That's right, baby." It sure was. I was overwhelmed with the number of people there. I don't know if you remember, CJ, but when we had the most... let me go back, because what I want to tell you is what I told my grandkids. We were in the family room, and they said, "Now, Granny, tell me," I was trying to explain to them. I said, "Okay, we called that Pawpaw's party." As what we called that. And they said, "Now, what are we going to do?" And I said, "Well, we're going to sit there, and they're going to talk about Pawpaw, and we're going to sing worship music." And they knew the songs, that we were singing. And I said, "You're going to see lots of pictures, and it's okay if you laugh at the pictures, because there's going to be some funny pictures of you and funny pictures of Pawpaw and everything." And I said, and I wanted them to know, because Donald's voice had gotten very weak the last 6 months, that they were actually going to play the Ice Bucket Challenge that Donald had done, and he had actually challenged some of the grandkids and his kids. And so I knew they were going to hear his voice, and I thought that they might, and I said, "And you'll hear Pawpaw's voice up on the screen." And one of my grandsons looked at me and he said, "From heaven?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I wish our technology was that good. That'd be really good. I'd really like that part." So for us, we just wanted to honor him, because he had led us well. He had led us so well. And so in the reception area, and they just did an incredible job, the care ministry, in just meeting, just here, give this to us, and we just do it for you. We walked into there, and of course, Donald's favorite thing was cheesecake. Anybody that had ever gone out to eat with him knew he loved cheesecake. So they had coffee and cheesecake, and then some fantastic cookies that a guy on his team, Ryan Van Sickle, makes the most incredible sugar cookies. And he made sugar cookies for that whole thing. And he told me later, "I cried through all of the sugar cookies." But and if you'll remember, there was a wall in there. And I don't know why, CJ, that I felt the need to do this, but for 4 years I had kept all of those cards and all of those drawings from little children at North Point and schools and just cards, everything that everybody had sent us. I had kept it, and believe me, I don't do things like that. But for some reason I had this big box, and every once in a while I would get them and I'd bring them out and I'd show, "Look at this, look at all of this." And so I gave that. I said, "I don't even know what that looks like, but here, this is what this is what people have blessed us with." And I will tell you, on this side of it, that is one of my New Year's resolutions, is to make sure that I send lots of notes Texts are good,
Yeah.
but man, there's something about getting something.
Yeah.
So anyway, I walked in, and right in the middle of that huge display with all of those cards and all of those little children's drawings was the big phrase, God's got this.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's powerful. That's amazing. And you mentioned this in last week's episode, but the reason that God's got this phrase is so powerful is because that's been your motto, or the phrase that has just kind of been the banner over this entire story, and all on social media, the hashtag God's got this. It sticks with you.
And you know what, CJ? It's not God's just got cancer. It's that God's got this, whatever it is. And you know what? If God doesn't have this, we're all in trouble.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
true.
Well, I've only been married for 2 years now, but I feel like I've already grown accustomed to what it's like to have someone else in my house, and the things that you just get used to from being married in it for 40 years. I mean, what was it like in the months kind of following him changing his address to heaven and you keeping your address here? What was that like in your house, and how did you just kind of cope with those recent months right after that?
I will tell you, if there's anything that you could say, I don't want to say blessing, but there's anything you could say about cancer, it's that you have all of this time to say everything that you want to say. And I can remember Donald sitting there in his chair, and I'd walk through with the laundry, and I'd say, I love you, babe. He'd say, I love you too. And then I'd go put the laundry out, and I'd come walking back again, and he'd be watching something on TV, and I'd say, I love you, babe. He'd say, I love you too, Sandy Wise. And say, I love you, Don Wise. And I said, honey, someday I won't be able to say that. Someday I won't. So we talked very openly about what it was going to look like on this side. And if I had one thing to say, is that this journey, Donald we were very intentional in what our boundaries were and our guardrails and how we were going to do this and what we did. So on this side of it, it made it so much easier in walking those months. I will tell you this. Personally, I don't care for the word grief. I think about that verse in 1 Thessalonians 4:13 that says, grieving as those that have no hope.
Yeah.
And for me, to grieve, it says I have no hope. Do I hurt? Oh, yeah, the loss is unbelievable. But the word grief, I'll tell you what I said. It's such a strong word. It literally, grief is like sucking the blood out of my heart to say that word.
Yeah.
So those first few months, I was surrounded by a lot of people. My kids wanted to make sure that I wasn't alone. My sister-in-law, Donald's sister, spent lots of time with me, and she made me do normal, and that was good. I needed to do normal. But I didn't cling to the word grief. I said, God, this is my journey, and this is the journey you've chosen for me. Donald honored you so well on the other side of it. I want to honor him and glorify you on this side of it.
Wow.
So powerful. Sandy, I've not thought about that as someone who's experienced grief. That's a profound thought for you to say, I want to see this with a different perspective. How is this journey, how's the journey after Donald went to heaven? How has it surprised you in some good ways?
Actually about a week after Donald had gone to heaven, I was standing there in the bathroom, and I just remembered, it was just like, I can hear him say, babe, you can do this. Come on, babe, you can do this. You can do this. And I'll tell you what, Ted, every time something it's like, okay, Yeah, he's up there going, go, babe, go, go, babe, you can do this. So because we talked about what it was going to look like on this side, I'm sure to a lot of people that I looked like I did some really, really crazy things. Of course, you can't see this, but I actually got my first tattoo.
Love it.
Yes,
Love it.
yes, I did.
Your first one, so there's going to be more.
Well, there might be, but
It's on your ring finger.
It's actually on my ring finger. It's Donald's handwriting. And he never signed my cards, Donald. He always signed it Illy, I-L-Y, I love you. So I got a tattoo 4 weeks. On our anniversary, it was like, oh my goodness, our anniversary's coming up. It's 39 years.
Wow.
And my kids said, Mom, you never let us get a tattoo. You're right. New day, new life, new tattoo. And then I thought, what is normal? What would Donald and I be doing right now? So I'm sure I did some crazy things. I'm sure people were like, but you know what? 4 weeks after Donald went to heaven, it was our anniversary. What did we always do? We always went to the Brave Spring Training Camp. So what did I do? I faced my fears and I went to the Brave Spring Training Camp. My sister-in-law and I went down there. She was the closest thing I had to Donald that could, travel with me still. And so anyway, she and I went down there, went to the Brave Spring Training Camp, went to Disney, yes, 4 weeks after that. And then a few weeks after that, I put my house up for sale that we had lived in for 20 years. And Donald and I had driven around a lot of time in his little car, and we looked at an area where there were some townhomes, and he'd say, this would be a good place for us someday. This would be a good place. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you what, I drove through there, and I thought, this would be a good place for me. And I put my house up for sale. God gave me a precious family that literally found my home on Zillow, zoomed in on it, and she said, that's the wisest house. And they bought it. And I know if you followed me, we've always put, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. And she sent me a picture after they bought it, and guess what they put up on their front door? As for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord.
Wow.
So I knew that on the outside it may have looked a little crazy, some of the things, but when you talk about it with your spouse, on this side of it, it was the normal thing for me to do.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. You have told a couple of stories of Donald still surprising you with some things.
Oh,
share a couple of those stories.
Sweetness, such sweetness. You're exactly right. One night I was actually riding around in his car, and it was just such a sweet, sweet time. Just, it's just kind of cozy in there, and I opened up the little tray, and there was some money in there. And I took the money out and I held it in my hand, and I thought, well, to begin with, he's the last person that's held that money. Mm-hmm. But not only that, one of our dates, we would go and we'd just go get a cup of coffee and we'd go driving around. Just drive. You're not distracted in the car. Mm-hmm. There's no TV, and we would just turn our phones off and we would drive all over the place, and we would set goals and we would talk, just uninterrupted time.
Wow.
And I took that money and I thought, he's going to buy me a cup of coffee. And that was such sweetness. It was such sweetness. It was like, one more time, I have a lot. I actually have journaled this whole journey. I journaled for 4 years. And on this side, I started a new journal of God as my husband and the way that he has met needs in so many ways. And one of the beautiful things is that Donald was such a relational person. Everybody that knew him, like I told you, he should have run for office and been, in government, because he was so relational. But because of those relationships that we developed for all of those years on this side of it, God has used so many people to meet needs in my life that I didn't even know I had. I'll have a text here, hey, you moved into a new place. I bet you need your curtains hung. Oh, that's right. I'm going to need curtains hung. Mm-hmm. I don't do things like that. So,
wow.
Well, that's actually a question I had, because I feel like, we all know people that have gone through a journey where we felt like we wanted to reach out to them and help them, and it's so hard to know. I mean, for me, I always feel like, well, what's the line? Am I texting too much? I haven't talked to them in 3 years. Is it okay if I even reach out? Are they going to think that's weird, or what? How have people helped you, or just jumped in, and friends and family, and just kind of been there for you in the months after? And what advice would you give people that want to love on somebody that's gone through a journey like this?
To begin with, I think give them the freedom to talk and feel like you can talk about them too. There is nothing greater than for somebody. I volunteer a lot at North Point, and for one of those young guys or girls to walk up and tell me a Donald story. Mm-hmm. I'll never forget, I was actually there a few months ago, and there was a guy there who was actually helping with something. He goes, I said, "Hi, I'm Sandy Wise." And he told me his name, and he said, "Wise? Donald Wise?" And I said, "Yeah, that was my husband." And he was with a guy next to him, and he said, "Yeah, Donald Wise," and kind of told a little bit of the story. And I said, "So, tell me something about Donald Wise." And he said, "If I could say one thing about Donald Wise, when you met him, you knew he gave a crap."
Love that.
I love it. That is fantastic.
So I would say, tell me a story. Tell me something. It's rich for me to sit here with Ted and him tell me a story. Mm-hmm. It's so neat because he knew him. Make me do normal. Make me go do the normal things. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the most blessed things that I've had is my precious couple friends. They've invited me still out for dinner. And it's so sweet because we sit there and we say, let's just pretend Donald's right here, and that's been sweet. And, for me, I guess I've learned, I was a little selfish at first because it was like, I'm the first Sandy Wise that's lost a Donald Wise. There's been other people that have lost their spouses, but I'm the first Sandy Wise that's lost Donald Wise. But I also had to realize there were a lot of people out there that lost a good friend. Mm. And I'll never forget, I was out to dinner with a couple of friends of ours, and they said, "We just love to go out to dinner with you because it makes us feel closer to Donald too." So I would say still invite them out. Probably one of the hardest things for me to do in those first few months is I had so much paperwork to fill out. They never tell you that side of it. And I would go and I'd get to the part about married, single, it's like, oh. So I decided, I'm married. He's just at a different location. I don't know if I'll get in trouble for lying, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm married.
Did people kind of show up for you in just random ways, and the months after, just show up and you really
craziness.
It?
Oh, craziness. Now, I will tell you the one thing that I said in tears, they wanted to start a meal train for me. And I'm like, I can think nothing sadder than me sitting and eating casseroles by myself.
That's where I draw the line. Don't help me in other ways.
No casseroles by myself. Please. Take me out to eat. Mm-hmm. Take me to a movie. Mm-hmm. One of the most precious things is I was sitting there. I looked out in the front yard, and I'm like, okay, there's a lady out there. And I came out and I said, hi, Sandy Wise. She goes, oh, I know who you are. I said, she said, your friend Pam told me what you've been going through, and I just thought you needed some flowers. That's my love language. Just sweetness. And then right before Donald went to heaven, one of the most precious things is we drove home from the hospital one day. We rounded our corner, and it was right before Christmas, and we rounded our corner. Our house looked like Lanier Islands. They had covered it in lights. It was the most beautiful thing. So, yeah, people just keep blessing.
I love that because it's more creative ways to reach out to somebody than just sending a text or whatever. It's and people want to do something tangible that will make you feel good and just make you smile. And I putting Christmas lights on your house is just the best thing I've ever heard of. I love that.
Well, I asked you earlier, Sandy, before we started recording, I said, I think you said someone had called and said, hey, it's right after Christmas. Do you need help getting your tree down? And I said, did you let them? You're like, of course. But I think a lot of times when people were hurting, someone reaches out and they really do want to help. It actually helps their heart to help your heart. But I think for whatever reason, we tell people no, and we're robbing them of a blessing is the only way I can think to say it.
I will tell you, the hardest thing is when somebody would say, hey, call me if you need me. Because it's like, I can't even remember that I saw you today.
Right.
Yeah.
One time in the hospital, I remember as we're sitting here, things keep rolling in my head. What I remember, this lady walked in, Pam, and she said, I was actually going through Nordstrom's and God told me to buy you a sweater and bring it here. It was a cold day in the hospital. So if God prompts you to meet a need, meet a need.
So would that be in the categories of, because with grief, people, sometimes they mean so well, but they don't do it well. And what are some things that you would say to people, they want to help someone that's grieving? What are some of the not tos? Like, call me if you need me. That's probably a really good one.
Call me if you need me.
No one's calling you if that doesn't work. It's kind, and I know with the sentiment there. What's some other things?
Books were not good for me. And I know that people had really, really great intention. I actually received a book in the mail called Devotions for Widows. Ted, I didn't even want to say that word for the first 8 months. That word would not come out of my mouth. And so it literally went from Amazon straight to the trash can.
Of course, perfect.
Right.
Perfect.
Right. Don't say that you know how I feel.
Yeah.
Because unless you lost Donald Wise and you were in love with him for 40 years and don't say that. Maybe I should have phrased that a different way.
No, I think
real.
it's real and it's perfect. Don't say. I know how you feel. So, what do you say? I know when we were going through a lot of grief, when someone would say, "I'm just so sorry," and I'm praying for you, like that would always sit well with me. Like I'm sorry, like I'm not fixing it. They don't. They're in a better place. That always drove me a little bit nuts.
Yes. I know how you feel. Please don't say I know. Please invite me. Even if I say no 10 times, keep inviting me.
And that speaks to the long-termness of this, because a lot of us will come flying in this first couple of weeks. I remember going through grief, and someone, it was a couple of months in, and my buddy said, "What's going on?" I said, "I'm not having a good day at all." And he goes, "What's wrong?" And my grief was so real and raw to me, but for him, it had been long gone because it was 2 months.
Right.
And I just thought, wow, you haven't been through this, because if you've been through that, it lasts way longer than 2 weeks. It lasts for a really, really long time. So,
Ted, the way that I have looked right now at my walk, I've kind of related it to a small child. You have a newborn, and that newborn, just kind of this first few months, they just kind of, they're in a daze. And as time goes on, you learn to walk. You may not say the right thing. You may fall and you get back up, and your parents help you back up. And I've really looked at my walk in that this is so new, and I'm such a baby at it. And I'm going to say the wrong things, and I'm going to fall, but I'm going to get back up, and I need people to help me do that.
So speaking of that, Sandy, kind of with those first few weeks, few months versus, where you are today, how has living on this side of heaven without Donald, and you mentioned the void and the loss when you read your Facebook post, how has the void and that loss and the journey changed and evolved over time? How has it changed from, 23 months ago to today?
CJ, I actually heard a sermon talking about your platform, and to realize, like I said, God gave me this journey. So first few months, it was like, ooh, I didn't want to say widow. And then now, you know what? That's my journey. That is my season of life. So therefore, I am embracing it. I am a widow. When Donald left this earth on February the 14th, God came down and filled that void. There are so many people that have a void in their life, and they need it filled. And so my season is widowhood. And the next thing is, what do I want to do? I want to finish it well. Mm-hmm. And so I started writing down what disciplines in my life I need to do to finish widowhood well.
Yeah. Wow.
That's amazing. What would you say to someone or what advice would you give to someone that kind of had a similar journey to yours and that they might have lost their spouse? Or do you have any advice that you would give to someone that's kind of on a similar journey?
I actually have a good friend that actually her husband went to heaven about 12 weeks ago, and he actually had battled cancer for 6 years. So she's about a little less than 2 years behind me. And she said something to me. She said, I find peace in talking to you. And I said, well, what have I said? And she said, the one thing that you've said is you've let me talk, and you've talked as well. And I know that I'm not crazy in the things that I'm thinking, and, that there's somebody out there that is walking it. Thank you for not saying that he died. I have new language to use. Plants die. Believers don't die. I told my children, one of my grandchildren said, Granny, I'm afraid to die. And I said, oh, buddy, don't you know as a Christian, you don't die. You just go from one place to the other. Mm-hmm. You just go to heaven. And Paul's up there. Mm-hmm. So we call it a celebration of life instead of a funeral. Mm-hmm. We call it change of location. He's in heaven. Just things like that. Just saying, as a believer, it's totally different, the journey. Mm-hmm. And to know that God chose this journey for you. He knew before he put you together with your husband that you were going to walk it. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Sandy, thank you so much for being with us. Just so much richness, and not just, till death do us part. This is just speaking so much to so many things. The reason I wanted you to be here, one of the reasons, is you bring to the table a remarkable gift of perspective. Losing someone you love helps you to know really quickly, like what matters and what doesn't. Do you have any final thoughts on how we can keep perspective in our marriage of what matters and what doesn't?
Donald and I had our girls make a list. And actually, I made the same list when I was in college. They made theirs even before they started dating, but a list of the attributes that you wanted in the man that you were going to spend the rest of your life with. Well, after you get married, it's really good to continue that list and start writing all of those things that you see in that spouse. In the journey that you're going, how they lead well, what they bring to the table in your marriage. And focus on what really matters.
Let the small stuff be the small stuff, right?
Right.
This whole conversation, I just want to, end our time with this is, I know Donald Weiss right now is going, Sandy, I am so proud of you. I am so proud of you. You have handled yourself and your family, and you've championed. You've made God look so good. You've made marriage look so good. And so it's someone on the outside looking in. I want to say thank you. And I know he's so proud of you.
I'd love to give a Bible verse that I actually just had made, and it's hanging in my bedroom. It's Daniel 3:18. And if not, He is still good.
Wow.
Thank you, Sandy.
Yeah, thank you, Sandy. What, like you said it a minute ago, Ted, but what perspective. And I think just resting in Sandy's story and just embracing the perspective she has, it's amazing.
I mean, I wouldn't have ever, it's been so amazing because knowing the topic of today's podcast, I would never have thought I would have walked away from this with feeling so much hope, you know? And I think that's what's been such an incredible thing is just to listen to you talk about your story. And it's not one of this pit of grief. It's so much more amazing than that. And I am so grateful that we got to have this conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to the Married People Podcast. If you found today's episode helpful and encouraging, we would love for you to subscribe to the podcast through your Apple Podcasts app. And while you're there, we would love for you to leave us a review because that will help us get this podcast episode in front of more couples who need to hear it, who need this perspective. And finally, if another married couple came to mind as you heard Sandy share her story, consider sharing this episode with them. And the easiest way to do that is to send them to our website, marriedpeople.org. That's also where you can find links to the book that Sandy referenced earlier in the episode, Don't Waste Your Cancer, and a link to Sandy's Facebook page where you can continue to follow her and her marriage story and even scroll back and see how she has used her marriage with Donald. That's the amazing part about Facebook is you can scroll back and you can, this story lives and it continues to live. And I know that Terry and I, my wife and I have done that and followed back then and continue to follow. So thank you for sharing your story, Sandy. And then finally, join us for next week's episode. Until then, I'm CJ.
I'm Afton.
I'm Ted.
I'm Sandy.
And thank you for listening.